wow, okay. All right, thank you. Okay. Bismillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والعاقبات للصالحين ونصلي ونسلم ونبارك على سيدنا الأولين والآخرين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Yeah, your mic is kind of hot, so it's like either quiet or it's blown out, which is typical for Muslims. Something about the microphone and Islam is not incompatible. So everything is proceeding as planned, essentially, is what I'm saying. So Jazakumullahu khairan for inviting me. And I have one small question, as in how long or until when am I supposed to talk? Do you have an idea? Because I know the schedule changed a little bit, so I just want to make sure I don't go over under. 11:35. 11:35. Okay, inshallah. So I caught the tail end of Shaykh Mustafa's talk, and inshallah I will just kind of try to add to that. And maybe, even though I tend to be reluctant to do so, I will maybe give a little bit of perspective as somebody that I hate the word convert, to be honest. I do not like the word convert, and I really don't like the word revert. If you call me a revert, we cannot be friends. I don't know what that is. But let's just say as somebody that was not born a Muslim, that chose to become a Muslim, and more importantly, for the last 35 years, has consistently chosen to remain a Muslim. And that impulse, that decision is driven by the fact that Islam is not necessary. Now, before anybody freaks out, Islam is absolutely necessary for the next life. And it's extremely useful for this life. But what I mean is that we are, oh, I'm sorry. Do I need to? A little closer? Okay, all right. This is better? I mean, people tell me I naturally don't need a microphone. Matter of fact, my wife always telling me, you really don't need no microphone, you talk too loud. But alhamdulillah, my wife is not here, so I can act up. So as I like to say that, again, also, we can't be friends if you ask me my convert story. There's no story to why I just became a Muslim. But I always say the more interesting question is, why have I chosen to remain a Muslim for the last 35 years, where I could have every single day chosen something else? So if I'm going to talk about faith, then that will be perhaps a little bit of the perspective that I bring, particularly for most of you. I'm looking out on the audience, and I'm guessing that most of y'all come from a legacy Muslim background, a Muslim family. And I feel like there's certain psychologies that come with that, where Islam is always sort of presumed. And therefore, when it comes to the question of, what was it, faith, love, and wealth, I feel like there's a pumpkin spice latte that's finna show up here in a minute. And we're gonna start doing yoga and mindfulness meditation. I'm like, who came up with this title? All due respect. And then you want a black man to come in here and talk about wealth. I'm like, you're gonna need a whole lot of faith if I talk to you about wealth. That's all I know. But seriously, I think sometimes when I look upon my fellow compatriot Muslims that come from Muslim families, is that faith is always a presumption. And so the only really advice I can give is to have a sense of desperation about your faith. And what I mean desperation is, be Muslim like your life and the hereafter depends on it. Because everything else can come and go. I'll be honest with you. And I'm not jaded, alhamdulillah, I'm very happily married. But I'm gonna be honest too. This is my third marriage. Love comes and goes. People fall in love and out of love every single day. This is a fact. This is why the Quran advocates فَأَمْسِكُهُنَّ بِمَعْرُوفٍ أَوْ فَارِقُهُنَّ بِمَعْرُوفٍ. Our holy book, Al-Kitab al-Mubin, tells us, it's by the fact that we have a surah, a chapter in the Quran, that in and of itself is called divorce. It's saying, like, people fall in love and then they fall out of love, but how do you deal with those things? Money comes and goes, especially if you get married, and then especially if you have some kids, money gonna definitely come and go. So These things are part of the ibtila'at of the dunya. They're part of just the tests and the trials of this life. In fact, being bequeathed money that Allah Ta'ala blesses you with, if we understand those ayat in Surah Al-Fajr, that we know that they are an ibtila, just as much فَقَدْرَ عَلَيْهِ رِزْقًا, just as much if our rizq or our money or our wealth is restricted, it's a test. And we know that also while we are supposed to be libas lahunna aw lakum, we know that we're supposed to be, complementary clothing to one another to beautify each other and shelter each other. We also know that it is going to be a fitna, that you will have your days that are ups and downs and so on. And so I feel like if we're going to have any conversation about love, which clearly they sent a message, we do not want you to talk about love, we want you to talk about faith, bro, because it might be problematic if you talk about love. And then they clearly don't want me to talk about money because I ain't got none, I'm an imam. So I'm going to talk about faith, and I mean that we're going to compartmentalize, or I would recommend compartmentalizing or situating the latter two in lieu of badran min, right, dharika min qabl, those that came before, right, particularly your faith. And so sometimes the challenge can come if you always feel that Islam huwa shay'un bayna tawaqqa'at wa istihqaqat, that Islam is essentially like something in between an expectation and an entitlement, well then we have an issue. Your faith is not guaranteed. Your faith is a ni'am from Allah Ta'ala. It is blessings from Allah Ta'ala, and it is guidance that comes from Him and only Him, of which we have to demonstrate our gratitude to that on a daily basis. I know that it's tempting when we come to these kinds of talks and we will talk about being professional Muslims, and how do we fit faith into or work into our lifestyle or faith into this or that. How come we never ever talk about I would love to see a seminar. How do we fit work into Islam? How do we fit marriage into our busy life of ibadallah? How do we fit all these things that we are demanded of us, but how do they fit into our Islam, and not how does Islam find a way to express itself like it is a weed or a mushroom trying to peek through, right, covered with this layer of dirt. And I think this is maybe either revealing about perhaps what we really think about Islam, or perhaps we are following the kuffar, and I know that can be a pejorative word, but it just really means sometimes we've watched one too many TED Talks. I mean, Shaykh Mustafa talk about social media. I sometimes worry about the TED Talkification of the mimbar and the things that we listen to, so we reduce everything to kind of like an inspirational 10-minute TED Talk. And this leads to certain outcomes that I feel that are not beneficial. And so I'll speak about the first. I said about expectations. What is your expectation of love? This would be a question that you have to think about. I see far too often that when it comes to the idea of love, which of course we know for us love can have many, we have mawadda, we have ishq, we have hub, we have many different words in our vocabulary as Muslims for love. But in general, like, what are your expectations? Sometimes I do a lot of marital counseling as an imam. Not that I have all the answers, but it is interesting when people come in and they start talking about their, disagreements as a couple. And a lot of it is because people just have unrealistic expectations of what they thought marriage was going to be. That it was going to somehow fulfill every need that they have. This is setting things up for disaster. Likewise, it's unfortunate that Sheikh Joe, he cannot be here, correct? Yeah. He's the one that he's like, can you take my place? So they called me sixth man off the bench to fill in for Sheikh Joe. But it's really unfortunate that he couldn't be here because he's an individual, may Allah Ta'ala bless him and preserve him, who has done a great amount of work, particularly in the field of finance and Islamic finance, but he's also done a great amount of work. He has a thing called the Nikah Masterclass. And one of the things that he does in that is he talks about prenups and expectations. What is it that you want from this marriage, and what can you give to this marriage, and what are you expecting to get back? Kind of like an investment. If you give X amount of money, It doesn't mean you're automatically, not every investment gives 100% return. Some investments give 2% return. Some give a 5% return. Some give a 50% return. And of course, we don't even talk about, well, what are the risk factors depending on the rate of return. So I think if I were to then descend, though I'm not supposed to talk, I understand I'm not supposed to talk about love, but I'm going to touch upon it a little bit because it will impact your faith, right? If you don't have the right expectations for love, it will impact your iman. Now we know that the Prophet ﷺ said that what? Iman yazid wa yanqus. Iman goes up and it goes down. We know this. But we know it as an abstract theory. We have difficulty dealing with it as matbuq or tatbiq. Right? We have a difficulty dealing with it when it is applied. And so, as I mentioned actually yesterday in our halaqah, I said, if you cannot withstand the qadr of Allah, then you will not be able to withstand and interpret and intelligentize the qudra of Allah. Right? If you can't understand that Allah can decree whatever He wishes, and part of that qadr is khair, and part of that qadr is shar. Some of it will be pleasing to you, and some of it will be displeasing you. And if you do not internalize this and accept it, when He does decree something with His izzah, with all of the power that Allah Ta'ala has, and it happens to be something that you didn't quite like or didn't expect, or it shattered your expectations, now you're going to have an issue of iman. Likewise with money. Money, what are your expectations for living this life? Do you think you will always have money? Will you always be look at what these people just went through, whether in the Palisades or Altadena. And I remember seeing an older gentleman, and it was sad actually to kind of see this. There was an older gentleman in Altadena, and I know he went through an incredible ibtila. On one hand, it was disturbing, but it was honest and refreshing. He said, I'm very angry at God. Now, he's not a Muslim. But he said, I worked my whole life to have this house. And now everything is gone. And I'm angry at God because I don't understand why He would do this to me. Of course, yeah, you don't understand because you don't understand who God is. You thought God is an ATM. You thought God is Santa Claus. You thought God does your bidding. You thought perhaps you could pray your way out of, musibah and ibtila. You thought you could pray your way out of, difficulties and hard times. And so, though I've clearly been told don't talk about wealth or faith, they are interrelated. And so if you don't temper your expectations, then they can cause problems in your faith. The other part is, I mentioned about what? The istihqaq, right? What we call in legal terms, even in fiqh, is an entitlement. Do you feel that you are entitled to love? Do you feel that you're entitled to wealth? And in fact, even more so, do you feel that you are entitled to iman? Do we feel we are entitled to be Muslim simply because we were born into a Muslim family? That you have not maintained it, like the bustan, like a garden that you have to constantly maintain. The Prophet ﷺ talked about the necessity of the tajdeed al-iman, the ihya of iman. He talked about the necessity to rejuvenate it. Because he said, يَدْرُسُ كَمَا يَدْرُسُ وَشَ الثَّوْبِ. It wears out like a hem and a garment. And so I think we have to have a broad view and then look ourselves hard in the mirror and ask ourselves, what are my expectations? And do I have perhaps some overblown sense of entitlement? And I need to what? I need to humble myself a little bit. So these would be some of the recommendations that I would consider us as we explore this topic today. I will say this, no pressure. The future of this ummah is kind of riding on you guys right now. And I mean that I'm a little older than most of you here. I'm looking around this room, ain't nobody even close. So I'm definitely older than you guys here. And you're no longer little kids, but some of you particularly have been raised, I get the feeling sometimes in a way that has coddled you and has dispossessed you of your responsibility to shape this community and this little corner of the ummah. And I say this because I don't have all the answers. I tell people all the time as Imam, I can help you, inshallah, bi'iznihi ta'ala, I can help you learn about Islam. But I cannot make you curious about it. And on top of that, there are limitations to what I can do. I do not have answers for everything. I'm not good at everything. There's some things that I have capacity for and some things that I don't. And I'm also only one person. So I know I always feel something wrong about this format. Like you are sitting there and I am up here standing and I have this wonderful speaking voice because I used to work for NPR radio. And I can wow you, with my voice as if I have all the answers, and you will walk away from here and the manna will fall from heaven like it did for Bani Israel. It's not the case. I am deeply invested in you, for you, inshallah, to make good choices and to prioritize your Islam. And so if we work together, again this morning in our khatira, we talked about the statement of the Prophet ﷺ where he talked about that the Muslim or the mu'min is mir'atun lil Muslim or lil mu'min. He talked about how the Muslim is a mirror to their fellow Muslim. Now, as somebody that went to art school, that studied photography and cinematography, this particular statement of the Prophet ﷺ is actually ajib, is really astounding. Because a mirror is just not merely a passive medium of which light shines upon it, and we get the reflection. But a mirror itself will have some innate qualities, so when light hits it, it will affect the kind of light. It might be more cool in tone, or it might be more warm. It may be more intense in its reflection, or it may dull the light. If it is of a more opaque material, some of the light will not reflect back as hard. What I mean is that we need to be mirrors of one another so that we encourage each other to be the best that we can and to roughly have the same major goals in life. And this is, I think, perhaps one of the great things, inshallah, I pray that comes out of this small conference is that all of you network with one another and that you stay in connection with one another and that you stay close to one another and that you encourage one another, because we can clearly see the kind of world that we are in currently and things that perhaps we see on the horizon. And we're going to need the love, support of one another. We might need the financial support, but definitely we need the iman support. We'll need to have the support for one another to encourage each other through these times. And even if everything in the world's, even if all of the big problems either get ironed out or we leave them to Allah, it's the quiet things, right? Getting married, having kids, what happens if you get divorced, what happens if you don't have kids. We put sometimes so much, and again, even the titling of this, I think, is very prescient. It's very illustrative of our thinking. So much is writing, alongside how we formulate our iman, which is, love and wealth. Why didn't we talk about companionship, friendship? I deal with people all the time in the community that they suffer from deep loneliness. And so that has a tremendous impact on their iman. And so if a person feels a sense of isolation, it will frustrate their capacity to germinate a robust iman. If they are isolated and lonely, it will frustrate their capacity to love. If they're isolated and lonely, it may frustrate their ambition to pursue money, not for the sake of money itself, but one of the reasons why we have a hard time today, just globally, if we look at our past, how did we develop? How did we have an Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah? How did we have in Ibn Taymiyyah, how did we have all of these great scholars from our past? One was the development of awqaf. Where did this idea of the endowment system come from? And who gave it? It was the people that maybe they weren't imam, they weren't shaykha, they weren't even tulab al-ilm, But they earned money and their heart was attached to the ummah and they wanted to give some good. So they built libraries, they built schools, they were the patrons of scholars and the patrons of publishing and so on and so on. These are the things we're going to need going forward. They were the patrons of artists because again, we can develop all the scholars in the world. I can sit up here and talk for days. And believe me, I can really talk. I used to get paid a living to talk on the radio. I can really, really talk. I can tell when I look out at my own congregation at Middle Ground and they start doing, hey man, wrap it up, bro. We didn't pay to hear you come here and talk for an hour. I can sit here and talk all day. But look at the effect. Just imagine if these three pictures at the back, and we've seen this, or maybe somewhere's around here. You ever gone somewhere and you've seen like a beautiful piece of Quranic calligraphy? Everybody from a child to a layperson to even the imam, when you walk by that, it's like, oh man, look at that. There's something, that art that is imbued with the spirit of Iman and Tawheed that just speaks in a way that I can't. Speaks in a way that no scholar can. And yet it doesn't replace me, it complements. And so we have plenty of people doing a whole bunch of talking, and that's all great. But we need to have also you guys collectively, helping to develop institutions of art that help to convey the essence, the truths, and the beauty of Islam in ways that I cannot do on my own, despite the fact that I speak well and I have a degree in English literature and all these other things. So I'm saying there's a lot of things for you guys to also be preoccupied with, just simply about falling in love and making dough. Right? I mean, seriously, I'm not trying, those are all important things. And I pray that Allah Ta'ala will provide each of you with a spouse that will give the qurratul a'yun, that will give you the coolness of your eyes and give you that sense of tuma'nina fi qulubikum, insha'Allah, that will give you the sakina and the tranquility in your heart, and that you will all prosper, insha'Allah, and have beautiful children. But regardless of whatever it is, know that there are areas and nooks and crannies and crevices of the community for you to develop and to participate and to contribute to that far supersede what I can do on my capacity alone. So do not take your Islam for granted. Don't live in isolation. Network and socialize. But at the end, understand that Iman is a whole separate affair from love and from wealth. Allah yabsutu rizq liman yasha. Allah gives His rizq to whomever He wants. And I would add in this context, for the purposes of our study today, include love as part of your rizq. That Allah Ta'ala causes certain hearts to come together and some to deviate. But whatever that it is, understand that Islam, you have to live your Islam with, like I said, a kind of desperation that I must hang on to this belief and let me be that mirror, so when the light of Allah Ta'ala reflects off of me, فَأَلَيْسَ هُوَ نُورُ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, is Allah Ta'ala not the light of the heavens and the earth? So if I am the mir'ah, I am that mirror. If the light of Allah reflects off of me to you and vice versa, you to me, and we remind each other, then in love, out of love. And here's the thing, you can be in love, fall out of love, and love again. I had a friend of mine, he went through a tough marriage, and it was also a very tough divorce. And of course, he went through a few years of the tip, especially dudes, oh no, man, I'm never getting married again. I'm never getting married again. And we're looking at him like, okay, sure, all right, I'll talk to you in about 5 years. 4 years later, we see him one day smiling. Well, what happened to you? Right? Because we're all, we're tired, we're working, right? He's single, got us all of a sudden. Why are you so happy? Oh, I met this sister and da-da-da-da-da. So also remember that Allah Ta'ala is always there, and that whether you fall in love today and out of love, you can fall back in love. If money comes today and is gone tomorrow, Allah Ta'ala can give it back to you again. But do not make your relationship with Allah Ta'ala axiomatic on the tests that He gives you. Focus on deriving meaning from those tests and do the best to study for them, so when you take the test, inshallah, that you pass them Jazakumullahu khairan. May Allah Ta'ala, inshallah, increase all of you in Iman. And may He, Allah Ta'ala, inshallah, give you the best of this life. رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. I finished 1 minute early. Hopefully that's okay.
Okay, so we're going to be starting our panel. So,
Do I need to keep this on?
Yes.
Okay.
So we do have two podiums.
Here, you start. Bismillah. You're on the right. Bismillah.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So this is a Q&A session, is that right? Okay. So we'll open it up for questions, and like most, this get fixed? MashaAllah, this got fixed. MashaAllah, may Allah bless it. Alhamdulillah. It's like completely changed. Like the donations just came in like right after I made the announcement, the donations just came in. Alhamdulillah. So usually the way question sessions work, just had hundreds of them. They always start slow, and then when people hear somebody else's question, they get a motivation, inspiration, like, oh, I have a question that's somewhat connected to that, and then it kind of picks up. So usually the way that I see it is that the people who kind of start in the beginning, they get their opportunity much more to ask questions, and maybe they get some extra reward as well for sparking the inspiration of others. So we got one in the back.
I missed the first session, so I don't have any questions for the first session.
Oh, I can repeat the whole thing again.
Yeah, maybe back off the mic a little bit, because I can't understand.
I mean, like, I have a question regarding the faith. So I have echo, right? The mic?
Maybe, yeah, that's much better. Yeah,
Can you hear me now?
there you go, yeah.
So this is my first time that I get my attention to the idea of that when I'm isolated and I'm separated, my faith will be affected. So all those people tell me, you have to have faith so you don't have to feel isolated or you don't feel separated. But the way I received your words was like the opposite. So your faith will not be like the same if you feel isolated or separated. And my question is, so if I feel isolated or separated or frustrated or whatever in life, like this kind of low frequency emotions that we always get exposed to, so how am I gonna help myself with my faith? Because during my resting state, I'm good, I'm very good, I have faith, I'm satisfied, I'm not angry about what's happening to my life, but during the tough times, it could be something at work, or it could be something fight with my mom. It's not like very big things in life. And when I have these moments, I feel like, I ask these questions, why this happened to me, or what is the problem with me? Why I don't get what I want? Or what is the problem? Is there something like the entitlement that you said, like, do I really deserve it? Like, is it like for me? And I have this kind of conflict in my head because I hear and read more about human development, and they say about like the law of attraction and how it works. And I have now a big, deep conflict inside me. How am I gonna live my life in a way that is easy, smooth? Like, if something happened to me that I like and I do sorry for it, and it happened to me, I'm not very happy, or very, like, feel like it's me that's doing it, and at the same time, it didn't happen to me, or that I didn't get it, so I'm gonna have, like, more faith that's good for me, or maybe I have to change the way that I did to get this thing. So at this moment in life, I feel I can stop on this idea that's making very big conflict in my head. I hope I'm not having very long questions. Thank you.
Directed at you.
Bismillah. I think I have a couple of ways to look at the question that you posed. The first is, do you have an entitlement to be happy? Were you created to be happy? Were you created to be sad? Why were you made? Why did Allah Ta'ala make us? ما خلقت الجنة والإنس إلا ليعبدوني. Right? Al-ya, the ya nafsi mahdhuf. Right? So in this verse, in Surah Al-Dhariyat, at the end of this verse, we see the word ya'budun. But if you look closely in the Mus'haf, there is a kasra on the noon instead of a fatha. So it's not just to worship in general, but it's meant to be, except that you will worship me. We were personally created by Allah Ta'ala for the exclusive purpose of worshiping Him. And therefore, all the emotions we have been given, while they are wonderful, and we're meant to experience all of them, we have to learn to temper our experience of them so we don't lose ourselves. So let's take sa'ada, let's take happiness first. Some people don't know how to be happy. And what I mean is, I don't mean like, oh, they're like always a sourpuss. I mean, some people don't know how to be happy without flying off the rails. So either when they experience happiness, but then naturally as it recedes, what are they're always looking for the next epiphany or the next moment of happiness, even if they have to artificially induce that by sniffing some white powder or injecting something in their veins. This is a problem we have particularly in this hadara, in this civilization. People, because they say life, liberty, in the pursuit of happiness, as if we were put here to be happy. Now, we weren't put here to be miserable either. And so likewise, if I experience misery, it should come with the understanding that it is temporal. It has a limit, and part of its limitation is, yes, what Allah Ta'ala subjects me to, my circumstances, but also my disposition towards it. And can I also foster other attitudes despite it? Right? I mean, in fact, when I look back on my youth, and I used to daydream in school, I hated school. I loved learning, but I hated school. And so my way to deal with the misery of school was to daydream. Right? So I found a way within the misery of the overall experience of 12 years in public school to daydream, and that was the way, in the midst of it, I found my little space. So one, I think we have to learn to find spaces within those moments of whatever the emotion is, happiness, sadness, anger, frustration, that they do not, be, ghalibana, they don't conquer us. And so we have to learn to accept that there are times I'm going to be sad. And that is not a commentary or some type of statement against you. It's okay to be sad. And of course, it should go without saying. Did not our uswa hasana, did not our example, alayhi salatu salam, did he not experience moments of wahda, sadness? Did he not lose many, many loved ones in his life? Whether we're talking about his wife, his children, his beloved uncle / big brother Hamza radiallahu anhu, and so on. And yet, there are many people that met the Prophet alayhi salatu salam that, according to their report, I never knew him except that he smiled. I never knew, even though we know there are other reports that what? The Prophet ﷺ, he cried, or he was angered, or he was annoyed, or this or that. And yet, there is no report of the Prophet ﷺ, whether experiencing sa'ada or wahda, happiness, sadness, grief, that it ever led to an extreme in his character, nor did it impact his worship. Nor did it impact. And therefore, now, we may not have the capacity because we don't have the isma of the Prophet ﷺ. We're not infallible or protected like that by Allah. But that's why he said, what? لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُ اللَّهِ. The Prophet ﷺ and our abandonment, not of his sunnah. This is one particular school. They go on and on and on about the sunnah. Yes, the sunnah is important. But if you don't follow the uswa, you're going to have bigger problems than the length of your beard and the length of your pants. If you abandon the uswa of the Prophet ﷺ, you will despair. You will become distracted with always wanting to have ups and downs in life. أولاً لمن كان يرجو الله. Do you have real hope to go back to Allah? Is Allah Ta'ala for you an abstract theory, a concept? Is it like asatirul awwaleen? Is it umniya? Is it like a fairy tale? Or do you believe like, you know what, the sands of time are ticking. I got by projected standards a couple more decades. Of course, I could go at any time. And then I go into the qabr. I will be asked 3 important questions. I will come out of the qabr. I will go before my Lord and I will have my book presented to me. Is this asatirul awwaleen? Or هذا هو الحق من ربي, الحق من ربي? Is this really the truth from my Lord? Because if it's real to you, then it will be there as a source of course correcting when you experience turbulence. And so I would say that, you know, we need to learn how to be happy. We need to learn how to be sad. We need to learn how to be bored. We need to learn how to be frustrated. Yes, it sounds like I'm talking about my 13-year-old daughter, right? So that, Dad, I'm bored. That is not my problem. I paid this, I paid this mortgage, I paid this light bill, I paid for that stupid iPad, I paid for this Xbox, I paid for that food in the fridge, I paid for everything. Don't talk to me about being bored. I said, do you know how many days I was bored too? Learn to be bored. Learn to wiggle your way out of it. If we coddle ourselves with things to distract us of further development, you talked about human development, then we were going to have issues. And I will say this, and I'll pass it off, is that be wary of, I'm not saying that there aren't aspects of Western psychology that do not have some interesting insights to the human soul, but foundationally, they do not need to invoke God or a creator in order to have a conversation about the human soul. Just as the evolutionist and the Darwinist does not need to invoke God to talk about how life came about. In fact, they emphatically assert that there is no need to explain the emergence of life through a God narrative. And likewise, if we're talking about the human development, human psychology, they are built on many unspoken assumptions of which we then attempt to kind of shellac a veneer of Islamic verbiage over and call it acceptable psychological inquiry as Muslims. This can lead to a lot of dead ends and cul-de-sacs. I don't know if that answered your question either. I think if you speak up, I think most people could probably hear you, but you know, unless you fix this microphone. Okay.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Question for Shaykh Mustafa. Do you think it's better to cut off social media as a whole, or to keep it but then tailor your following list or your feed to watch maybe halaqas or lectures or stuff rather than just cutting it as a whole?
Good question. I think it's case by case. We have to understand something, that social media is addictive, and it's addictive by design. It's not accidental. So there is, there's a Stanford laboratory called the Laboratory of Persuasive Technology, which actually helped make social media more addictive on purpose. Some of the most intelligent people in the world working there. So when we understand that something is addictive, you should always be a little bit cautious of it. If there's some good in it, you're connecting with some of your family members distantly or whatever it may be, then putting some controls in place to prevent yourself from falling into that addiction is definitely a requirement. In terms of cutting it off completely, it really depends on the individual. So if you find that you're constantly falling back into it and the controls that you put in place, whether it's deleting the app or saying I'm only going to use it during certain periods of time, or I'm going to time myself, or I'm going to check my screen time for the week and how much I've used, and if you find that you're not following those rules, then you should probably take a temporary fast from it. There's a really good book I recommend that can help you with that. It's a book by Professor Cal Newport. It's called, he has a few books. It's called Digital Minimalism, where he talks about the different strategies of disconnecting from addictive technology and how long your fasting should be from it. I recommend it. You don't have to go through the whole book, but he's actually got a website as well, and he talks about his project that he did with the university students in the university, I think it's at Notre Dame or something like that. I recommend checking that out. So it's on a case-by-case basis, but if you keep falling into the same habit, you should definitely try to cut it out for a while and see how it changes your life. And go back and see how much it really has, how much did you lose? It's about the harms and the benefits.
So this is a question for Shaykh Mustafa regarding
surrounding yourselves with people, being mindful of who you surround yourself with. It's kind of like a two-part question, I guess. If we say like we're on a ranking of Iman, like 1 to 10. Let's say just hypothetically I'm a 5, and I have people who obviously are above me, like more 1, 2, 3. I want to surround myself with, and then maybe I have people who are 6 and 7, but they want to improve. Is that how do we find the balance of, are we that source of inspiration to lift the 6 and 7s up to us, or should we only focus on being surrounded by 1s and 3s, versus also the 1s and 3s may say, well, I don't want to surround myself with the 5s because, so where do we find that balance of who we surround ourselves with to improve ourselves, but also be an inspiration to guide others?
Sure. You said you had 2 questions? Or no?
No, I guess that's it.
Okay, that's one. Yeah. So a great question. So if we look back at the hadith that I quoted, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, فَلْيَنْظُرْ أَحَدُكُمْ مَنْ يُخَالِلُ. Be careful whom you take as your, yukhalil means the word khalil. And khalil means your very close friend. So I think what's important for us to differentiate between, when we're associating with people, we should associate with all types of people. We should interact with all types of people. We should be friendly with all different types of people. But the ones who we take as our very close friends, that we want to spend most of our time with, that's where you want to try to pick people who are a little bit around your level, or just maybe slightly above, because what that's going to do is going to help you solidify your own number where you're at. And while you're improving yourself, your friend circle might be changing if the other people are not moving in the same trajectory. At the same time, it's a common question that everyone asks, if you're always trying to have friends that are better than you, then number one, how do you help the other people who are still improving? And why would anyone want to welcome you into their circle if you're always trying to go for somebody higher? And that's just a natural part of it. So I think the key is to differentiate between your very close friend circle and you being friendly and interacting with other people, but they're not necessarily your closest friend circle. In addition to that, people are not fixed. So I think what the difference between, I like that you gave like a rating, right? The rating, there should be 2 ratings. The rating should be, where are you right now? Is it a 5? Is it a 7? Is it a 3? And where do you want to be in the short term? What's your trajectory? And I think people should hang out with each other that are more in line with the short-term trajectory of where they want to be, rather than simply where they are right now, because they're all going to help each other to get to that trajectory. So maybe if we reframe it that way, it's going to help a lot.
Could I just want to add one thing to that. I think there's a temptation to, all of what Shaykh Mustafa said is true. I would add only that don't only look at your friends and think about, well, what is their grade? Are they a 3, a 6, a 7? But over the long haul, look at your friends and look at you and say, well, why did nobody move from a 3 to a 4 and I'm hanging around them? Or did I used to hang out with some people that were 6s and 7s and now they're 5s and 4s? Or maybe we don't hang out no more. Why did they drop me? Right? The temptation is like, they dropped me because they're not keeping it real, or they're not this or that. No, maybe they dropped you because you're not up to their level. So I also would encourage you to think about, again, going back to that, what al-Muslim mir'atul akhihi. Like a Muslim, even though the Prophet ﷺ refers specifically, right? The Muslim is a mirror to his brother, but in general, right? Think about your impact that you are having on others, and not only about the impact that they are having on you. Obviously, yes, you definitely want to think about the impact that people are having on you. But what is your impact on them? Are you raising the water level at all? And don't discount yourself to not have the courage Matter of fact, we might all have that friend. Let's say we're all fives, but we got a couple of friends that's like twos, 1.5s. At least I'm from Detroit, so I got lots of friends that are like ones, right? But they're good people, but it's like I can only, I can run into you here and there and chop it up for a minute, but like we're not tight. But if the opportunity presents it for them to like come along for us to, grab a bite, why? Because maybe if through that occasional socialization, they might move finally from that 1.5 to a 2, and they might inch their way up. Have the courage to be better and realize that, maybe I can have a positive impact on a person. Right? So not only thinking about the impact that people have on you, but what, inshallah, you can do to have a positive impact on those others.
I'm going to add one more thing to that. It's a really important topic. Is that a lot of it depends on your personality. So if you have a strong personality where you're generally influencing the people around you, for better or for worse, that's going to be different in terms of the circle, what type of circle you want to hang out with, versus if you're a more passive person and you're usually being influenced by the people you hang out with. So depending on what personality trait you have, you could do the whole Briggs-Meyer personality test, or whatever it is. Your personality is going to play some role in what benefit or what potential danger you're putting yourself into. So keep that in mind as well.
Can you hear me? Okay. So, unfortunately, I feel like in our time today, we have a problem with feeling that we're brain dead and we're unable to focus on learning for a long duration of time. So after 8 hours of work, commute and whatnot, we try to embed these small habits into our day to learn more and educate ourselves more. But there's a point where we just can't take in more knowledge, and that's when we resort to social media because it's so easy to. And so I have a couple of questions. And one, how do we deal with guilt and not utilizing our time always efficiently when we're not able to be in a state of learning? And then two, are there any platforms or podcasts that you would recommend that are lighthearted for when we're in the car after doing a 2-hour drive and we just want to listen to something that is beneficial, but at the same point it's light enough for us to be able to take in, other than going to entertainment YouTube videos or Netflix or something like that?
I'll start. First thing about feeling brain dead. This is something natural, that there's a feeling that's there. We are used to constantly being stimulated by things. And kind of what he mentioned, what Imam mentioned about his own daughter, this is something that we have to really understand, is that the idea of being bored and just absolutely doing nothing is extremely healthy for you. And research shows that it's extremely healthy to just simply do nothing sometimes for a period of time. And people need to become comfortable with the ability to simply do nothing and not constantly be stimulated by listening to some background music, even if it's listening to just Quran in the background, which is good, which is great, alhamdulillah, but it's like always needing something to be there. It's not necessarily the best thing for you. So I do encourage people to look into the idea of trying to just shut off and do nothing for a little while and just be okay with that. It's actually very healthy. The same professor I quoted before, Cal Newport, he's got a good book, another book called Deep Work on that topic. So I recommend checking that out. When it comes to Islamic education, when it comes to what can we learn, or let's talk about feeling guilty first. So the idea of feeling guilty, there's two types of guilt. There's negative guilt and then there's a positive guilt. If you're feeling guilty because you wasted your entire evening binge watching, Netflix or something like that, and you wasted your entire day when you had 4 hours and you had stuff to do. Instead, you're like, no, I had a long day at work. I deserve to waste a little time, and your 30 minutes turns into 4 hours, and then you're sleeping late, and then you're messing up your whole morning, and your fajr is messed up and everything. Then you know what? I don't want to give the advice that you shouldn't feel guilty. You should feel guilty. You messed up. Okay, that's positive guilt. So when you do something wrong, there should be a sense of guilt that I messed up and I shouldn't have done that, and I have a sense of regret, and now I'm gonna do something about it and I'm gonna make a change. If you don't feel anything, you're just like, oh, it's okay, not a big deal, everything's fine. No, everything is not fine. So that's the positive guilt, and I don't think anyone should go away from that positive guilt. There's the negative guilt, where you're gonna sit there and you're gonna relive that scene over and over and get locked in the past, and now it's messing up your ability to do anything right now. That's the negative guilt. So if we ask the question, should I, how do I avoid that guilt, or should I feel guilty about that? It's positive guilt, then yes. And then you learn a lesson, and the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يظلم المؤمن من جحر واحد مرتين, that a believer should not be bitten from the same hole twice. You make a mistake, you learn your lesson. If you do it again, you still just learn it again. And just try to make an adjustment, try to make a change, do something different. So that should be there. In terms of light listening in Islamic education, I mean, there's a lot of podcasts that I could recommend. One of the things that I suggest to people is, it's a little bit old reference, but Halal Tube is pretty nice. So a lot of people, they go to YouTube and listen to lectures. Halal Tube is like a list of very popular speakers, and they put it in like a YouTube style format. You can listen to the audio version, you can listen to the video version if that's what you're streaming when you're driving or whatever. So those are like lectures. Some speakers are more lighthearted, and some speakers are more very knowledge intense. So people like Shaykh Qadi is very more pretty more knowledge focused. Other lighthearted speakers like Mufti Menk is more like telling jokes and like making things pretty entertaining and stuff like that. So what I recommend to people is everyone has their own style that they like. Everyone has their own personality that they click with. Find which speakers click with your personality and that you like. You say, I kind of like this style, I like this person's spiritual style, I like this person's intellectual style, I like this person's sense of humor, and I enjoy listening to the lectures. You can make that your lighthearted listening because you enjoy them. So I recommend Halal Tube, and then another one that podcast is I think it's called Muslim Central, and has all these Muslim speakers and all that. You can pick the one that you like, and it's good to vary it up sometimes because you don't want to be only stuck in the few speakers that you like their style. Sometimes you need to hear things from someone who may not speak the style that you like, but you need it. So sometimes you're supposed to push yourself out of your comfort zone and say, I need to listen to Shaykh Mustafa Umar, because he's very spiritual, even though he's just so slow. And sometimes it just gets so boring. But you know what? I need that hard-hitting lecture because he's talking about death, and you can't tell jokes, in a proper lecture about remembrance of death or preparation for death. So I need to push myself out of that comfort zone. That's my general advice.
Bismillah. I'll kind of go back to what I said at the very beginning when I was talking, which is about tawaqqa'at and istihqaq, like expectations and entitlements. So you talked about, I have this long drive and commute and I'm tired at the end of the day. Well, do you feel entitled then to work all day and come home and somehow still have energy for your Islam? It sounds to me like maybe that's the case. However, that sounds like maybe an error in judgment. Now, this is where the uncomfortable part may come in. What are you doing to structurally change your life that would allow you to come home and not be burnt out? Maybe you need to think about a different type of job. You need to think about a different type of commute, a different type of lifestyle. And that might not be something you can solve by listening to Yasir Qadi, Mufti Menk, or going to IKEA, or, it's not a simple solution. What effort are you willing to extend to change your life so that isn't the case? Maybe it'll take you 20 years to get there. But we want to, I feel that way now. I feel burnt out, I come home, and I want to change right now. Well, it's not gonna happen right now. So what happens is we also become infantile in our expectations in that I want to change and I want it now. And if I can't, then in some ways, I'll just take my marbles and sit in the sandbox by myself and be grumpy. You ever see a kid that doesn't want to cooperate and they just sit there and pout and they're miserable? I'm like, because I come from a Midwestern black family, and my parents were in their 80s and 90s. So it was like, ma fi shafaqa wa ma fi rahma. It was like, it was old school tough love. Now you can sit there all day, you can be miserable or not be miserable, it's up to you. And what I mean is that we have these senses of entitlement. Okay, maybe I'm burnt out at the end of the day, but am I just gonna sit here and continue to burn out for the next 15, 20 years? Or will I do something to reposition myself and maybe also reassess my priorities? Yeah, maybe this job is making me a lot of money. Do you need that money right now? Maybe you do. So then, you have to then also count your blessings. If you attempted to count the blessings, la tuhsaha. Allah Ta'ala says what? And you couldn't do so. So maybe you need to look at other areas and do a kind of like cost-benefit analysis and, take it on the chin. Or if you're like, you know what? No matter how much money I'm making, I can't live this way. It's just absolutely corrosive to my soul. Well, then you got to make a change. You have to be acting like, as the French say, the enfant terrible. This like terrible baby that just wants to have its way, its cake and eat it too. And so I would highly encourage you, again, interrogate your assumptions, interrogate your expectations, and interrogate sometimes your very subtle, kind of senses of entitlement that they themselves are misinformed because you're just following some myth we were all given that this is what we have to do to lead a happy life. You have to live in, Lake Forest and live in a $1.5 million house and drive a $200,000 car, and you have to have all this, even though you're miserable and your marriage is miserable and your kids are gonna grow up and be miserable people, versus having a life that's built on a third of that. You don't have all of the accoutrement, you don't have all the fancy stuff, but you know what? You have sa'ada, you have sakina, and you have tuma'anina at the end of the day, and you can leave this life with husn al-dhan of your Lord. And it doesn't have to be one massive extreme or the other. I'm just saying, don't accept your circumstances as if they are set in stone. Allah Ta'ala knows your circumstances, but demonstrate to Him that you want to change your circumstances, just not because they're getting on your nerves, but Ya Allah, these are getting in the way of my worship of you. These are getting in impacting my iman in you. Ya Allah, iftah li makhrijan kareeman. Oh Allah, open up a way out of this for me. And until that happens, fasbir sabran jamilan. Then persevere and know that Allah sees you struggling mightily, being bored, sees you struggling mightily, being frustrated, sees you struggling mightily, being fatigued, and take some sense of alhamdulillah that my Lord sees me. And inshallah, He will open up a way for me out of this. But just don't sit back and say, well, either I want a happy meal right now. I want some, doorway to open up in existence, and I can just teleport from one set of circumstances to another. No, really think it through. Sometimes the things that we think we desperately really want and need, when we get them, they make us miserable. Maybe we only need half of that. Maybe we only need the third, maybe we don't need it at all. Maybe we need something entirely different. And this is where it comes to the love part. Find somebody with you that's gonna have the flexibility. Because if you're with a person that doesn't, if they need that and it'll break them, but you keep it, it's gonna break you, you're gonna have a problem. So you need to work these things out in terms of the flexibility of your personalities when seeking and pursuing these things.
We have one more question in the back here, and then just to be mindful of time, we only have 7 more minutes.
Wa alaikum salam.
What does a decent Islamic education look like? What can we do as family members to provide the younger generation with that decent Islamic education so that they can hold on to their faith during the trials that they're inevitably going to go through throughout their life?
Are you speaking about yourself or your children?
More for, I don't have any kids, but for the younger people in the family, or maybe, my future kids, Yeah, so outside of like a decent Islamic education, or
comment on things that should be studied that people don't really know. So let me start with, we should always focus on our own Islamic education first. I hear always from parents, they say, you know what can I teach my kids? What can I do? What kind of classes are available for my kids? And then when I look at those parents, I'm like, man, you guys don't know anything about Islam. Like your Islamic knowledge is very, very minimal, and there's such an interest of getting somebody else to do stuff. But when those kids look at you as a parent, I know most of you are not parents, but once you grow up, or if you looked at your own parents or whatever, this is not to criticize anyone specific, but when you look at a group of people who are telling their kids to go and study Islam, and then those kids take a very basic class and they come back and they're telling mom and dad don't know 90% of the things that they learned, that's very demotivating. Because it's like, well, what about you? You didn't do that, right? So first and foremost, we should always think about ourselves. What can we learn and what do we need to learn? So in terms of subjects, we all know, most of us should know, that the main sources of Islam are the Quran and Sunnah. So does that mean you go and you read the Quran directly and then you read the Hadith, Bukhari, Muslim, Riyadh al-Salihin, one of those books directly, and you're good? I got the Quran, I got the Sunnah, and everything's good to go. No, that's not the way it is. That's not the way we approach any other subject. So what happens is there are different fields of study, different subjects that are attached to being able to understand or unlock the tools to be able to properly contextualize and understand the Quran and contextualize and understand the Hadith or the Sunnah. So among those things, I'll just throw out a few. I have an entire curriculum, developed. Most schools have curriculum developed. These are not subjects, in my view, that are just there for people who want to become a scholar, or people who want to become an imam, or who want to become a sheikh or something like that. This is what the average middle class intellectual Muslim should have. And what I mean by middle class intellectual Muslim, when we say middle class, we mean like money-wise, right? Economically middle class. What I mean by intellectual middle class is that most of you are college educated. You went to a university. When you studied history, when you studied, whether you were paying attention or not, when you studied math, when you studied sociology, when you studied psychology, when you studied computer science, when you studied biology, whatever field, whatever subject you studied at a college level, and you did a lot of subjects across the board. So when you did that, you have what I call a middle class intellectual academic education when it comes to non-Islamic subjects. Somebody like that also should have some level of Islamic education at a higher level, just as a standard. So what are some of those subjects? Some of those subjects are Quran, reading the Quran with a tafsir. Right, so understanding the context behind the verses when you're reading them, not just a straight-up translation of the Quran. Another subject would be Seerah, the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. Because what it does, it helps you contextualize the entire message of Islam. It's like an introduction to Islam in general. There should be a fiqh subject. Fiqh is Islamic law. You should have studied all the subjects that are required for you. So when it comes to purification, you should know how to make your wudu. When it comes to wiping over your socks, you should know what are the conditions that you can wipe over your socks when you're at work or not, without having to ask someone on the spot, hey, am I allowed to wipe over my socks? Well, there's conditions. Never heard about conditions? Well, I never took a class like that ever mentioned any conditions. It's because you didn't take any class. You didn't read a single book on that subject. So there's purification on all the stuff that you need to prepare, clean yourself for your prayer. Then there's a prayer chapter. Then there's a zakat chapter. You should know how to pray your zakat. Most of you raised your hand and you said you're working full time. That means you're zakat eligible. I mean, not to receive. You are required to pay zakat.
Zakat liable.
You're required to pay. So, what's the term used?
Liable.
Liable. You're zakat liable. Well, you're liable to pay zakat. But most people don't even know how to pay their zakat. People ask me questions all the time. They've been zakat liable for 10 years. And they say, well, this is my salary. My salary is 75K. How much zakat should I pay? And they don't even realize that you don't pay zakah on your income. You pay zakah on your savings. It means the absolute fundamental, like just the bare minimum kindergarten level. You know, my son was 4 years old and he knew this, right? It means something's missing in that education. Fasting rules. Hajj, you can learn Hajj when you go for Hajj. It's nice to know. Marriage, the rules of marriage. What constitutes a marriage contract? All that stuff. So there's different chapters in the book of Islamic law. There should be some class that's available, and there are classes that are available, but these are the subjects that we should be going through. We should learn how to recite the Quran properly. We should improve our tajweed, our correct way of reciting. That's somewhat of a more superficial subject, but it's something that should be done. So these are some of the subjects that are there that we should all have at least a rudimentary basic knowledge of across the board in all of these subjects. In addition to knowing hadith, should at least know like 200, 300 hadith, the content of them. You don't have to memorize them. You should know the content of them. So you should know these are some of the subjects that should be there. There are so many resources now available. There's YouTube videos online. There are institutes. I think Imam Marc has his own institute or something like that too. I used to have my own. It's defunct now. There's a lot of books you can get available. I have my own books on Amazon too. So there's a lot of resources for people who want to dedicate themselves. But the key, like I mentioned in my lecture, the key is to develop those habits where you're dedicating yourself to learning on a daily basis. You set out 20 minutes a day and say, I'm going to learn, but I'm not just listening to passive lectures while I'm driving. It should be focused on these topics. I need to learn about the life of the Prophet Muhammad. I need to learn about the life of Prophet Ibrahim. I should know the story of Yusuf from the Quran, and if I don't know it, and these little kids are learning it, in school and stuff like that, Islamic school. What's going on with me? There should be a baseline level of Islamic knowledge. So these are some of the subjects that I mentioned. I have a whole curriculum. If anyone wants, they can always email me. I can share with you a curriculum of like 20 classes that every Muslim should take. So that's my take. You can ask.
Do I have any time or no?
No, but you can make it very quick.
Okay. I would just think of it more simply than two really quick things. One, it's like working out. Just find a routine that works for you, like a diet. Is it keto? Is it paleo? Is it this or that? They say like, what is the best diet to follow? The one that works. So find something that works for you. And as Shaykh Mustafa has said, there's like it's almost like Baskin Robbins now. I mean, there's so many different institutes, teachers, mashayikh here and there. What I see fundamentally is a lack of A, curiosity, and then B, enthusiasm. Some of us just are not curious. And so because to me, when I became a Muslim when I was 18, I had no idea even what this was. But I was very curious. And within a year's time, I had learned Arabic where I was able to actually self-study. Why? Because I was just curious. Secondly, I was very, very ambitious, and I was fueled by my curiosity. Sometimes I feel like born Muslims have this that's why they'll ask you, like, oh, tell me your convert story. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that, because what you're saying is you have already arrived at Islam, and you want to trap me in this feedback loop of always becoming. It's as if you have nowhere to go to. You have no development, nowhere to go to. And so Islam, it's more like an aesthetic thing. What is pleasing or not pleasing, not out of necessity. Do what you can to cultivate curiosity. So a lot of this social media stuff, to be honest, as Shaykh Mustafa said, they have some of the most skilled, highly paid psychologists in the world building these things to be, unbelievably trapping and addictive, and they sap your curiosity. Be curious. To me, I don't understand why Muslims, I never ever had to attend a conference. When I became Muslim, I'm like, this is the most fascinating thing in the world. And now at 52 years old, 35 years later, Islam is still the absolute most fascinating thing in the world. And I have probably anywhere between a $50,000 and $60,000 book collection in my house that I've built, and I've spent every last penny that I could spare on buying books. And I'm not saying that to praise myself. I'm saying a lot of the issues that we have is that you just aren't curious. And you need to find a way to get rid of the things that are stunting your curiosity and that are halting your ambition to learn about Islam. Because when it comes to dunya, it seems like we have an insatiable curiosity and faith in the myths of dunya, of what we're supposed to pursue, and unlimited energy. We will literally burn ourselves out and die a so-called early death pursuing the dunya. But if you ask somebody to read a half a page of Quran, it's like somebody dumped an avalanche of rocks on you. So you need to ask yourself, why is Islam just fundamentally not more curious and more fascinating to you? I personally don't get it. Even after now that I'm an imam, like I still find Islam to be and in fact, really everything else is just sort of like interesting. Only Islam is truthfully fascinating. I would highly encourage you to, sometimes it's not about adding, a lot of the answers and sometimes we give you are additive. But as I learned how to color grade when I was in art school, the way that you really cultivate a really beautiful picture is actually through subtractive. You want to add a warm tone, you don't add orange, you subtract some blue, right? So look at your life, what can you subtract from it that's actually stunting? It's like a Faraday cage. It's blocking the signal, the ilham and the hidayah that Allah has sent all of us. And so we have the responsibility to be curious and fascinated by this deen, and no walking human being on this earth is going to be able to give that to you.
All right, we're going to change the schedule just up a little bit. We're going to start with Dhuhr. Here, I'm just going to do it. We're going to start with Dhuhr prayer right now. Where you guys registered, the sponsor room. We're going to pray in there. If you have any prayer mats or blankets in your car, please grab them, just to help cover as much of the floor as we can. And if you need wudu, out the back doors, right across the hall, there's the bathrooms. Please try to keep them clean. This is a public facility, so we are an example of people that haven't dealt with Muslims a lot. After prayer, food will be right out here. Make sure you have your raffle tickets. That's how we'll identify who gets their meals. Well, yeah, one side of the raffle. Hold on to the other one because you'll actually need it for the raffle itself. And then the other thing is we're going to have our love session afterwards. There's going to be a QR code displayed on the back table over there. I'll put it up in a minute. If you have any questions, scan the QR code and you actually submit them anonymously through there. You have a question right here?
When will Dhuhr start?
Right after this talk, I'll give you guys like 5 minutes. Let's say 12:27. We'll start actual prayer in that room over there. And then inshallah we'll start with our meals. Is anybody here vegetarian? I don't want to call you out, but if you are, please try to go first. No, just I want to guarantee you your food. We do have a limited number of vegetarian entrees. So if you are vegetarian, I do ask that you go first just to get your food quickly. Other than that, hope everything's going well so far. If you have any questions or concerns, reach out to us. Anything else to add? No?
Do we leave our stuff here? Are we going back here?
Yeah, all the main sessions will happen back in here. We'll start back here at 1 o'clock, I believe. 1:15?
Hey! Assalamu alaikum, man. Alhamdulillah.